as under the heavens be gathered together to one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good.
Well, okay, hi. I'm live. Let me turn down the volume a little bit. It looks like I might be shouting in your ears. It's really fun to know all of you are there and to have seen you on the chat line before the show starts and everything. And I also am very excited about this series. This is actually this is such a treat because these are like my two main shticks: is the role of Judaism and the role of science in some sense, because of course you guys probably know that's my background, which maybe I should start. I love being called Dr. Roy, but I don't deserve it because I don't have a doctorate. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from MIT, and I did really well there, if I can say so. I think I was a pretty respectable scientist. And then I got a master's degree from Harvard Business School. And then I was invited onto faculty of Harvard Business School. And I pursued a doctorate also at Harvard Business School. But I dropped out before I got my dissertation. Technically, it's called ABD, all but dissertation. And what happened was I had my theophany, and I, my witness testimony, I found out about God and living forever and what really matters in life and so forth. And, I just didn't have the interest I had before in teaching Harvard and MBAs how to make more money. And that was noticed. That was noticed by my students. It was noticed by the other faculty members and so forth. It was pretty clear that my heart wasn't in it at that point. So I'm not Dr. Roy. I'm Mr. I probably could legitimately get away with professor, since I have been a professor at times and am still a professor at times, not 12 months a year, but no doctor. Now, if you saw the thumbnail for this series, for the first show of this series, had Saint Bernadette on, incorrupt in her glass casket coffin, and it doesn't anymore. It has creation, and the reason is because the more, as I mentioned in the chat, the more time I spend preparing a show, the more I find I just want to talk about. And so the shows expand, but I have to limit the show to about 2 hours, because actually less than 2 hours, about an hour and a half, because of running off to Mass. So the Lourdes, the Saint Bernadette and Lourdes topic got squeezed out. till probably the next show, or maybe even the next after it, if I just keep babbling. Now, okay, what is this series about? I mentioned this a little bit in the Judaism series, that until the Enlightenment, let's say, until the introduction of what people thought of as science, everybody believed in God. I mean, think about it. There wasn't a culture on the face of the earth that didn't believe in a god or gods, right? There isn't, a tribe in the depths of Africa. There wasn't people in the Middle East. There wasn't a people in Europe. Nobody thought the world created itself. It was just too stupid. It was just too stupid to even be that stupid. And what happened was, with the Enlightenment, all of a sudden, I'm going to tie myself in knots, but basically, the Enlightenment and what passed for science gave people the illusion that they had an explanation that didn't require God or gods or something more than the material world. So the powers, there are basically two powers in our world, right? Jesus said it. He said, I have to go now. The prince of this world is coming. Jesus isn't the prince of this world. This world is a battleground between basically Christ and the devil. Of course, the coins, the chips of that battle are human souls. That's why it's a very serious battle and really matters. But with the emergence of science, which in itself is a really good thing, I'm not anti-science. I'll call it scientism. A possible alternative religion emerged, which says what we used to attribute to God, we now have a scientific explanation for, so we don't need God anymore in the equation. So there was a very real sense in which science replaced God. Not true science, because true science is dependent on the evidence, and all of the evidence is not explainable without God. That's one of the reasons for this series. However, a kind of a scientism, a kind of moving one's faith from God as being the object of faith to science as being the object of faith, and from seeing the world as coming from God to seeing the world as coming from science, that religion of science actually emerged. Now, it doesn't explain the evidence. It doesn't explain the data. And in that sense, it's not scientific at all to believe in scientism, to take science as the replacement for God. And let me start with a quote. I think I've used it before in this series from G.K. Chesterton. And here it is. The believers in miracles accept them rightly or wrongly because they have evidence for them. The disbelievers in miracles deny them rightly or wrongly because they have a doctrine against them. That's the actual quote. When I paraphrase it, I sometimes get it a little bit wrong, but it's the same meaning. Science does not succeed in explaining all of the evidence. Miracles is one very large piece of evidence that science by definition can't explain. So it's developed a philosophy that waves them away, which will be the topic of another show in this series, a subsequent show in this series. I'll call it logical positivism, but it's basically a philosophical error that does away with the problem of miracles. Today's show is not going to be focused on miracles per se. That's why the thumbnail of Saint Bernadette went away, and Lourdes, because Lourdes, of course, is a creation. So, okay, I'm just looking at my notes. You'll have to forgive me. Okay, I watched a couple of nights ago, for the first time, I never saw it before, I watched the movie The Matrix. And I can't completely get it out of my head. So there's something, it really is connected. And here's how it's connected. As I said, before the Enlightenment, nobody was stupid enough not to believe in something like God or gods. Saint Maximilian Kolbe used to say in his apologetics, if you're walking down the street and you find a gold pocket watch sitting on the sidewalk ticking, you're going to think that somebody made it. You're going to think it came from somewhere and that somebody made it. you're not going to think, oh, it just kind of happened to be there. And of course, what we see in the world is billions of times more complex than that gold pocket watch. But somehow, because we are now scientific and we have science, we can just look at it and say, oh, nobody made that watch. It just kind of appeared or it made itself or something, and walk on down the sidewalk. The purpose of this series, I don't know how many of you have seen The Matrix, but the purpose of this series is, what's happened is we've been brainwashed. What's happened is the natural way of seeing the world, which is that it came from someplace. In fact, it came from God. It's being run by God. We're subjects of God. We're responsible to God. And all of the pattern and order of the universe and all of the beauty in the universe and the beauty in life. I mean, what are there? There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kinds of flowers, of insects, of sea creatures, of trees. I mean, every single one of them is an expression of God's beauty and wisdom and generosity, which is how people always saw the world. Now we don't, right? We look around, we say, oh, evolution explains that. Evolution explains that. Evolution explains that. So it's like we're living in this matrix. Matrix, of course, being this illusion world that's imposed on people in the movie The Matrix, where the natural perception of what's around us would be to see the role of God. Largely because of evolution, which is why this show is about evolution. We've been brainwashed to not see God as behind everything. But whenever we see something, we say, oh, well, we know the explanation for that. It doesn't require God as evolution. So I'm not an apologist. I don't like apologetics. I don't like arguing with people about why they should believe something. That's not the purpose of the series. The purpose of this series is deprogramming. Okay, it's deprogramming. It's like, what was that guy's name? Morpheus in the movie The Matrix. It's deprogramming. It's basically to help people, me included, because it's always useful to me when I preach. I also preach to me. To help people break out of this matrix illusory shell that has replaced God. Because it's very, very unfair to God. And it's even unfair to us because we don't approach, our entire experience of life is totally different if we see everything as coming from the hand of God. So yes, I see somebody on the chat saying which pill to take. So yes, I found this wonderful, 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 some of you have seen the movie, okay? This is Morpheus presenting the two pills, the red pill, which will result in you waking up from this illusion. And in this case, this show, the illusion is evolution. The illusion is that we don't need God to explain the world. Or the blue pill, which lets you stay asleep in the world of the Matrix. Okay, wasn't that fun? I have a lot of fun with these shows. And with the internet, it's instant to, pull up these things and find them. So anyway, I guess if you want to take the blue pill, time to turn off the show. A lot of people do want to take the blue pill because the advantage of the blue pill is you don't have to worry about sexual behavior. You don't have to worry about morality. You don't have to worry about selfishness. You don't have to worry about love and kindness, right? Because we're just this chemical accident, a bolt of lightning hit a puddle of amino acids 5 billion years ago. And here we are. And nothing matters, so we can be completely selfish, and we're just dead when we die anyway, so we might as well have as many notches on our belt as possible, or whatever, be Hugh Hefner, or whatever our personal little pleasure fantasy is. That's the blue pill, right? The red pill means, oh my God, God is watching me at this very moment, and I will be held account for every word I say, for every act I do, for every influence I have on other people. I will be held to account for that, okay? So that's a good reason not to take the red pill. However, the red pill is the truth. Okay, good. So another reason for talking about this No, I don't think I'm looking at the chat stream. I don't think the red pill was supposed to make you die from reality to another reality. It was supposed to make you wake up from a kind of dream world into reality. Really, it was a matter of waking up. It wasn't a matter of dying. And I think we should wake up to the truth of life because whether we like it or not, the moment we die, we'll find out it's all true. And so we might as well have lived our life the right way until that moment rather than the wrong way. Because when that moment comes, boy, will we wish we had. This was my initial theophany, if you've seen my witness testimony. Okay, so another reason to talk about the red pill right now is, as you know, I am interested in current affairs. And in the last 20 or 30 years, it's really interesting how fake science has become the primary means of political control in the world. We saw the global warming hoax. You don't need me to do a show on the global warming hoax. I'm sure there are plenty of YouTube videos, but according to the predictions in 1980, we'd all be underwater by now, guaranteed. Snow would be ancient history, guaranteed. The ice caps would have melted, guaranteed. The global warming was computer modeling. It's called dynamic modeling. I used to do that at MIT. Actually, when I was at MIT, the professor who invented dynamic modeling was still there, and I actually kind of worked with him, but only as a really stupid undergraduate student. Anyway, you just put equations into a computer and you get out whatever you want, but it has the veneer of authenticity. You can get graphs out of it, you can get pictures out of it, and you can sound very, very smart. So global warming was a arbitrary computer modeling exercise to come up with the answer that people wanted, which was, again, basically to control civilization, to control the world, the one world government. Before then, if any of you are old enough, do you remember the population bomb? I think that was in the 60s and early 70s. Absolutely scientifically proven that the world population would outstrip the food supply within 15 years, and there'd be wars all over the globe, and we had to limit the human population, or we'd all be in this kind of Armageddon situation. That also came out of MIT, by the way. The organization that did it was called the Club of Rome. They did the computer modeling behind that. I think that was the first kind of global hoax computer model. And of course, now we have the pandemic hoax computer model. I'm not saying that COVID-19 isn't a real disease that, when it gets its claws in properly, is really miserable. But the mortality in the United States to date has been, I think, about 105,000, which is about what a bad flu is. A bad flu season is about 80 or 90,000. Plus, those mortality rates have been inflated by the fact that all of a sudden nobody died of pneumonia. You should see the curve, the graph. I mean, basically, once the government powers, or the powers that be, wanted to make COVID-19 as bad as possible, all of a sudden anyone who was dying of bronchitis or dying of pneumonia or dying of any other respiratory illness, all of a sudden was dying of COVID-19. They didn't legally did not even have to be tested for COVID-19 to be put down as COVID-19 being the cause of death. That's in itself is enough to explain the difference between 80,000 in a normal flu season and 105,000. So anyway, the whole COVID-19 thing was this fake science dynamic modeling. You remember when it started, there were going to be 2 million deaths in the United States, so forth. Computer model. Then the next week, the guy who came up with that computer model said, oh, never mind, maybe it's more like 200,000. Meanwhile, the stock market, loses 40% of its value because of a fake computer model. So anyway, that's all a digression, I guess. But it basically it's like, let's take the red pill and start looking critically at what passes for science. Science is real. Science is true. I'm not being critical of science, but I'm being critical of the using a mythological overlay on science to just browbeat everybody into accepting whatever the powers that be want them to accept. And the ultimate power that be in that regard is, of course, the enemy of man's salvation is Satan himself. And the most important thing for Satan to have us believe is that there's no God. Okay, so it's not too surprising. Of course, he also wants us to subject ourselves to the one world government, which is why he's doing what he's doing with COVID-19 or the pandemic and global warming and so forth. You see what I mean? It's all part of the same matrix coming from the devil. I don't, in a way, I don't recommend that movie because I'll tell you why I don't recommend it. Is because in the movie, the world of illusion. How can I put this? In the movie, the world that you broke through to by taking the red pill was controlled by the bad guys. In the real world, in our world, the world that you break through to by taking the red pill is controlled by the good guys. It's kind of a reverse. It's good news. It's not bad news. You don't wake up to bad news. You wake up to good news when you take the red pill. You wake up to the good news that nothing bad ever happens, that everything that ever happens to us is the most perfect thing that could be arranged, coming from the hands of an all-knowing, all-loving God, especially those things that cause the most suffering at the time, that the day we die won't be the end of our life, but it'll be the beginning of our true life, okay? That, we're not alone in a heartless, soulless universe, but we're being held deep in the heart of God himself, who knows us by name and cares about us as though you were the only person he created, I was the only person. So it's really good news that we wake up to, okay? So that's why I want you all to take the red pill. Okay, will I ever get to the show about evolution? It's your own fault. You tell me that you like my digressions. Okay, so bottom line, we have to see through this fake science, to see through to reality, to take the red pill and see and enter God's world knowingly, so to speak, okay? So here we go, back to Morpheus. Please, guys, take the red pill. Okay. So, on to the real show. I like the preaching better than, well, I shouldn't say that. I like the real show too. Okay. So, let me just start. Growing up, I grew up in the 60s, basically, late 50s and 60s. You know, I was given the Kool-Aid. You have a choice. You can believe in God or you can believe in science. You can have religious faith, but that requires kind of checking your mind at the door and putting on intentional blinders, but not blinders like this, but blinders like this. Basically, you have to choose ignorance and being wrong if you want to believe in God. Really, I was kind of taught that growing up. Can I see your hands? How many of you were taught that growing up? Probably any of you who went to public school. Anyway, that science basically contradicts religious faith, that science is provable and true, and therefore religious faith is disprovable and has to be false. Part of that is, of course, that miracles can't happen. This was a big problem for me because I really loved Judaism and I really loved God and I loved the Old Testament stories. And Passover, Passover, it's like the biggest annual celebration. Culturally, it's sort of like Christmas. In other words, it's by far the biggest feast, family get-together of the year in Judaism. And the centerpiece of Passover is the story of the Jews' exodus from Egypt, which means the Jews crossing through the Red Sea. Big miracle, right? Big miracle. I love that miracle. Okay? As a matter of fact, fortunately, I seem to have someone was there with a cell phone camera. So let me show you a clip of what really happened at the time.
The Lord of hosts will do battle for us. Behold his mighty hand.
God opens the sea with the blast of his nostrils.
Isn't that great? Anyway, so that was in my, that was in my head. That was in my mind's eye. But of course, none of those things had happened. Well, actually, there were two problems. One is, of course, none of those things that happened in the Bible are true. But in a way, I was permitted to believe that because, I was going to religious education. So in another way, really, what I had to kind of wrap my mind around was somehow miracles used to happen, but they no longer happen anymore. Then when I got into junior high school, it got even worse because then I was really taught why none of this could possibly happen. And one of the techniques that was used, that I also want to inoculate you guys against a little bit, is one of the appeals, I'll call it scientism, this kind of fake religion that puts science in the place of God, is you feel smart. It appeals to arrogance. It appeals to elitism, to being special. There are the ignorant peasants out there, but you know the true story. That's always very seductive. It's behind a lot of heresies. It's behind Gnosticism, all kinds of stuff. It's behind occultism. You're the special one. You see through. It's actually a reversal. It's like you see through the illusion of religion to the reality of science or whatever. Anyway, so I learned enough in junior high school and high school to feel very full of myself. Okay, so like I learned Newton's 3 laws of physics. Obviously, Newton's second law of thermodynamics made miracles impossible. I was such an arrogant little, 13-year-old SOB that I actually brought that up in religion class to my, rabbinic student religion teacher that, wait a minute, we can't believe in these miracles. What about Newton's second law of thermodynamics? Because you feel so smart because, Newton's second law of thermodynamics. That is really a consistent thing about this scientism is the way, you like to feel smart. So, anyway, so, yeah, I didn't have permission to believe. And then I got into 10th grade and I was shown, the origin of life. Now, this looks like it should be a comedy, okay? Really. But believe it or not, this drawing comes from a biology textbook. It was in my biology textbook in 10th grade. I guess that's when you're about 15. And it comes from an experiment done in 1952. Not an experiment done in 1602. It's so primitive. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's called the Miller-Urey Experiment. And it was the explanation of the origin of life. Because evolution only explains how we got from being this single-celled amoeba at the bottom of the ocean to how we got, wearing a plaid shirt and talking into a video cam. Evolution can explain all of that. I'll get to that later in the show. But you also have the problem of the origin of life. So here was the explanation for the origin of life, no joke. The Miller-Urey Experiment. Now, this is a text from a kind of a science website called, or a science magazine, I think, called Earth Sky. For nearly 9 decades, science's favorite explanation for the origin of life has been the primordial soup. This is the idea that life began from a series of chemical reactions in a warm pond on Earth's surface, triggered by an external energy source, such as a lightning strike. And the pernicious thing about this was we had this picture in our biology textbook, which was the experiment that was being done. And in this experiment, I know it's kind of impossible probably to read it on the size of your screen. But basically, you have a jar of salt water to represent the ocean being heated up, giving off steam that passes through an electrical spark, which is the lightning, and condenses down into a puddle in which you have life. And I was literally told by my high school biology teacher that they're running this experiment and, they just have to run it for a number of years and eventually it will produce life. So it's already an understood technology producing life. It's just that they haven't had the, the Bunsen burner bubbling for long enough. That is really embarrassing, okay? So, okay, you have the problem of the origin of life and from non-life, which is a huge problem, which I'm going to get to later in the show if I get to it in this show, otherwise in the next show. A little interruption. Today is the feast day of St. John the Baptist. All saints are my favorite saints because I want to suck up to all of them. But John the Baptist is really neat because as a Jew coming into the Catholic Church, it was nice to have such a primary saint who couldn't be accused of not being Jewish, so to speak, who was 100% Jewish because he died, before the church. And as a matter of fact, my vocation began on the feast day of John the Baptist. I would have to figure out the year, probably about 1994. I gave my first public talk on theology. So anyway, it's the feast day of John the Baptist, which means it's a special sung mass, thank God, this evening. So I will be leaving a little earlier than usual. So I definitely have to end on time, which means that some of today's material may run over to the next show, which might be as soon as Friday, actually. So anyway, digression. Okay, so that was about the origin of life. Huge problem. Evolution doesn't even pretend to have an answer to that. I'll talk about that if I get to it. But okay, we know that evolution does pretend to be able to talk about how we went from this amoeba crawling, amoebas can't even crawl, but this amoeba on the bottom of the ocean to you and me, okay? So evolution can talk about that. And the way it can talk about that, and it has an explanation for that, is that we have genetics. Animals reproduce generation after generation after generation. The blueprint, so to speak, from one generation gets passed on to the next generation, but there are occasional mutations in the DNA. So, all you have to do is have favorable mutations that somehow help the individual survive. It moves up the next little step. And then, you wait another few million years, you have the next favorable mutation and moves up the next step. And those favorable mutations mean the mutants out-reproduce the non-mutants. Actually means the single mutant out-reproduces all the other non-mutants, takes over the gene pool, waiting for the next favorable mutation. So Darwinian evolution is 100% dependent on random mutation and natural selection. Random mutation, natural selection. You with me? Okay. That's the only mechanism allowed in Darwinian evolution. Random mutation, natural selection. Natural selection means the survival of the fittest. So now back to high school biology, because that's actually, this module of today's talk is actually on high school biology. It's on deprogramming. So I'm addressing the programming that took place, between when I was like 12 and 18 or something. Okay, so back to high school textbooks. They have proof of evolution. Tons of proofs of evolution. Have you heard that? I have yet to hear a single proof of evolution. I'm going to talk about some of the fake proofs of evolution. So one of the fake proofs of evolution is the moths in England. I don't know if you guys remember this or had this in high school. I'm looking at the chat, microevolution versus macroevolution. And let me address that, because those terms scare me a little bit, because the same word is used in both. Natural selection, okay? Some people are albinos, right? I don't know what the percentage of the population is. Maybe, 1/100% of the world's human population is albino. Tell you what, if we kill everyone who isn't albino, everyone will be albino. Okay? We'll be a new species of albinos. Evolution in action. No. It's simply a selection within a pre-existent gene pool. Selection for a trait within a gene pool which was heterogeneous. In other words, you had albinos, you had black-skinned people, you had brown-skinned people, you had yellow-skinned people, you had red-skinned people, you had, they call us white, but we're not very white. Then we have albinos. You know, you have this mixed population. You know, if you killed everyone who wasn't black, all of humanity would be black. That's not evolution. It's not even microevolution. It's selection within the gene pool, selection among variants, pre-existent variants. Okay, so the example in my high school textbook was these moths in England. You see, so I'll pull up the screen. Pull up the screen. There you go. You had these moths in England, and they were white moths. Or speckled moths, actually. As a matter of fact, that's not the best picture to pull up. I should have pulled up this picture instead. I'll pull up this picture instead. Okay, you had those white speckled moths. You see the one to the right on your screen there. It blends in well with the bark, right? It's hard to see. And then you see a black moth, which of course is easy pickings for a hungry bird because it sticks out against the bark. Before the Industrial Revolution in England, all of these moths, apparently all of the moths, were this gray, white, speckled moth. I'll go back to the previous slide. After the Industrial Revolution, what happened was there was a lot of soot because coal was the main energy source. All the trees got covered with soot. They all turned dark gray. And therefore, within, I don't know what, 20 years, all of the moths looked like the moth on the left. They were black or dark gray, because that way they would, blend into a dark gray tree. In other words, a tree covered with soot. This was an example of evolution. I can't believe that, these high school teachers and textbook writers have the nerve to be that dishonest. There is no limit. There's no limit to dishonesty in the Matrix people. Okay, and the people who are trying to program us, trying to take over our minds. They don't even mind contradictory lies. And I'll just point out to a recent one. Do you guys remember whenever it was, March 1st, we were going to have this economic shutdown for 15 days to flatten the curve. The point was we didn't have enough ventilators. So we had to flatten the curve so that people would come down with COVID-19 more gradually rather than all at once. It's more than 15 days since March 1st. It might have even been February 15th. I don't remember when that was. They don't care. I mean, we see this. We see this actually. In the riots going on now too. There was a great clip from CNN of the CNN reporter talking about a peaceful protest standing in front of a burning building. A Target that had been torched, or I actually think it was an auto shop that was torched behind him, up in flames, up to the sky, covering the peaceful protest. Then being embarrassed by lies is not a problem for them, okay? So here they have what's clearly selection within a population, right? We have albinos. We have black swans, the fairy tale about the black swan. And apparently, once in a blue moon, you had black moths. They probably had a mutation. They didn't have the right, color, genes for color. So they were black. So it was random mutation within a population and then selection for that trait within the population. Then we have, are you guys with me? I had the same pics in my bio book. Yes. And they're still in the bio books. Now we have Darwin's finches. They're named Darwin's finches because they are Darwin's illustration of evolution, okay? They come from the Galapagos Islands. And you have these finches, with some have little beaks, some have broad beaks, some have long beaks, okay? And the story is, it's a perfectly good story. Excuse me. The story is that you had this species of finch, and it spread from island to island. And then They were separated on the different islands, and the islands had different climatic conditions or ecosystems or whatever. So on some of those islands, you know, the only good food was worms underground, so the finches needed long beaks. And on some of those islands, the only good food was grubs behind the trunk of trees, so the finches need strong beaks to poke through the bark or whatever. I'm making up the story. I don't remember what the details were. So over the generations of finches, the finches on one island would have broad, strong beaks. The finches on another island would have narrow beaks and so forth. Again, what you have is variation, random variation within a species, then being selected for. It's fine. Do you want to improve the human race? Do you want to make a race of really tall men? I have a solution. Let's just kill every woman under 6 feet tall and every man under 6 feet tall. We don't even have to do that. We just have to sterilize them. And guess what? The next generation of humans will be taller. And if we do it again and kill everyone under 6'2", they'll get even taller. This is evolution in action. This explains how the amoeba became us. No, it's variation within a species. It's random variation within a species. There is no evidence whatsoever to a favorable mutation, favorable in the sense of increasing complexity. There's no evidence at all, indication at all, of a change in species. It's simply selection among random characteristics within a population. I hope you guys are all with me, because this is really, maybe this will be the only foundation stone that I'll get to in this show. Okay, but back to high school biology. I may not get out of high school in this show. Okay, then a couple of years later, I learned a great phrase. Do any of you know this phrase? Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now, if I thought I was smart when I learned about Newton's second law of thermodynamics, it didn't compare to how smart I thought I was by being able to say ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Okay? I was clearly smarter than anyone else in the room. Say it 3 times fast. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. You've got to be smart to say that. Now, more proof of evolution, more non-proof of evolution that passed for proof of evolution. Okay? So what's this mean? Ontogeny is obviously a long Greek or Latin word. Origin, of course, Greek or Latin, that talks about the development of an organism. In other words, in this case, the embryonic development of the organism, how we start out as this, one cell, or fertilized cell, and, divide and divide and divide and become an embryo and finally become a person, or rather, a fully grown human being. And we're a person at the moment that egg is fertilized, actually, but that's another issue. So ontogeny is the development of the organism, from conception until maturity. Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a species. And this German scientist, Ernst Haeckel, I believe he was also a philosopher, claimed to prove it from embryonic development. So some of you may have seen this diagram in a biology text, even college biology text, maybe more so than high school biology text. And it is the evidence that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And basically what it shows is, going horizontally, it shows evolution. So we see different species, from really simple, supposedly, fish on the left, going on to a salamander, going on to, I believe it is a toad, and then a chicken, and then a pig, and then something I'm not sure, and then a calf, and then a human being. So that's, if you go from left to right along the bottom, you see them as fetuses. And if you go along from the left to the top, you see them as very early in their embryonic development, the different species. So a vertical column is a single species. And going down that vertical column, you're developing in the womb and going across that horizontal row, you are following evolution to greater and greater complexity. And the idea is that the human embryo starts out looking like a fish embryo. And then as it develops, it looks like a salamander embryo. And then as it develops, it looks like a frog embryo, and then a chicken embryo, and then a whatever it is, a pig embryo, and so forth, until it looks like a human embryo. So basically going diagonally from left to right while you go from up to down shows this recapitulation of phylogeny taking place in ontogeny. However, the facts didn't fit the theory, so it turns out that Haeckel had to fake his drawings, which he did. He faked his drawings, and this is an example of the original illustration that he claimed he was reproducing in his text, and the final illustration as it appeared in his text. And you can see that although they both kind of look like seahorses, the big bulge there on the left was removed for his illustration because that big bulge contradicted the orderly flow that he wanted for his evolution. So basically, he was an out-and-out fraud. And there were other evidences of his fraudulentness also, including the fact that he took the same woodcut and printed it 3 times, claiming it was a picture of a different thing each of the 3 times, showing how those 3 things were similar. They're going to be similar if you use the same woodcut for all 3. Anyway, not a problem. He's still a hero. He's still in the modern biology texts and so forth. There is some discussion of some of his drawings being less than perfect, but he's still kind of a hero. Anyway, this whole piece of the show is just the fraudulence that this matrix is dependent on. Okay, now that we have DNA and we have genome sequencing, there is a new proof of evolution that has become very popular. And I don't want to embarrass anyone. I won't say which of my brothers-in-law it is, but I actually have a brother-in-law who believes in evolution. And, he cited this as, the microbiological / genetic proof of evolution that we have now. Until now, it's just been a theory, but now we actually have genetic proof. So I have to go through that because it's really typical. It's entirely circular in nature. All of the, by the way, excuse me, well, I hiccup. All of the scientific disproofs of the faith are circular in nature. In other words, the people did not really see the sun dance in the sky at Fatima because the sun can't dance in the sky. Therefore, it was a mass hallucination. Therefore, we know that it was a mass hallucination in Fatima, and the sun did not dance in the sky. Basta. Really, this is the explanation you get. Are there any other examples of mass hallucinations? No. Maybe in the case of other miracles. Is there any kind of psychological, you can make up anything, but any kind of objective, verifiable evidence of mass hallucinations? No, except that obviously they happened because people thought they saw the sun dance in the sky at Fatima, okay? This is called circular reasoning. This latest genetic proof of evolution is pure circular reasoning. Bear with me for a moment. And, okay, I can't distract myself too much with the chat stream. Okay, so here we have, this is from very recently. I think this article is from, I don't remember whether it's from 2010 or 2020. I'm sorry. And you won't be able to read this, so I apologize for putting it up in such small text. All life on Earth evolved from a single-celled organism, a new study confirms. This is from a science journal. A new study confirms that all life on Earth evolved from a single-celled organism. It's no longer a theory. A new study has confirmed it. A confirmed theory, of course, becomes a fact. It's a fact. Using computer models and statistical methods. God bless computer models, because otherwise we couldn't make up science. Biochemist Douglas Theobald calculated the odds that all species from the three main groups of life evolved from a common ancestor, versus, say, descending from several different life forms or arising in the present form, Adam and Eve style. Notice that little dig at us cretins who believe in religion or the Bible or something. You know, they just can't restrain themselves from making fun of us. I'm a Jew, so I'm supposed to have horns. You guys aren't Jews. You're just supposed to be, you know, blithering village idiots because you believe in the Catholic faith. Anyway, back to Douglas Theobald, or maybe I should say Douglas Theobald. Maybe I should say Douglas Theobald. The statistical analysis showed that the independent origin of humans is an absolutely horrible hypothesis, Theobald said, adding that the probability that humans were created separately from everything else is 1 in 10 to the 6,000th power. In other words, 1 followed by 6,000 zeros. How does he know this? All species in all three domains share 23 universal proteins. A universal common ancestor is assumed to be the reason the 23 proteins are as similar as they are. These are the proteins that make up the DNA. It's highly unlikely that the protein groups would have independently evolved into such similar DNA sequences, according to the new study to be published tomorrow in the journal Nature. In the journal Nature. This is really authoritative. I think the journal Nature was also behind the pandemic, by the way, if I'm not mistaken. I think it might, well, no, I'm guessing, but I think it was actually involved in establishing that hydrochloroquine isn't a good treatment. Anyway, back to the mainstream. Okay, so what does this consist of? Okay, basically, all of the major branches of animals on Earth. You know, I forgot what those three groups were, the three main groups of life. Let's say they're bacteria and reptiles and mammals, something like that. Their DNA is all based on the same 23 complex proteins. So this proves that we all evolved from a single organism, because it's highly unlikely that when life evolved from non-life, remember that lightning hitting that Bunsen burner back then, it would have resulted in the same group of proteins in the DNA in three very different forms of life. Okay, proof, positive, that we all evolved from a single initial organism. What if there was a creator who created us using a similar basic blueprint? Oops, there goes 1 followed by 6,000 zeros. Yeah, I guess I would explain it too. If we were created, why should God create one system? The DNA system is an incredibly brilliant system, needless to say, for reproduction. Why would God create one system for one group of animals, one system for another group of animals, one system for bacteria, one system for reptiles, one system for mammals? Maybe the design was reused. Okay, I have a 4-cycle lawnmower in my garage, and I also have a Jaguar. I bought it very cheap, but it's actually true. It was, but anyway, but you know what? I know for a fact that Jaguar evolved from the Honda lawnmower. How do I know that? Because they're both 4-cycle engines. So it had to just come from there. It can't be that a design that was really good for a lawnmower also turned out to be a good design for a luxury car. It couldn't be reusing a design by an intelligent designer. No, it had to be that the lawnmower became a Jaguar. We should all be so lucky, right? Then it would be a reliable Jaguar because it started out as a Honda. Never mind. That would really be an evolutionary advancement. Anyway, do you see how circular that reasoning is? We know that evolution is true because there are common DNA patterns among all of life. Well, that would be true if evolution were true, or that would be true if God were true. Okay, so how does it establish one over the other? This is why, I'll go back. This is why this is what we're talking about, guys. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about a blue pill. Because all of this anti-God, diabolical brainwashing doesn't hold water. That's the point of the series, by the way. So there you have it. Recommend it to your friends. Subscribe, all that business. I'm supposed to say that stuff. Okay, so that was the single origin slide. Now, as I mentioned, Darwinian evolution requires a stepwise path, and each step has to provide a reproductive or survival advantage. Only those mutations that enhance the animal's survival or reproduction will take over, will dominate the gene pool and be passed on to the next generation. Okay? That's super important to realize. This has various names. You can call it irreducible complexity. But think, because the basic premise of Darwinian evolution is that from one generation to the next, daddy to little boy, just a single generation, there is a mutation, an accident in the DNA replicating. And so some gene or stretch of genes gets messed up and the offspring has a mutation. This mutation ends up becoming prevalent, taking over the population, right? Like albinos taking over the population. Well, the only way albinos are going to take over the population is if they reproduce a whole lot better than the rest of us. I'm not going to make a racial joke here, okay? But there's one in the back of my head, I think. Anyway, if they reproduce a lot better than the rest of us, or if they compete a lot better than the rest of us, okay? So if albinos are really good at killing everyone around them, or if they were really good at having, 200 children instead of having 2 children, then maybe if you had from one generation to the next this weirdo mutant who came out albino, the first albino, then maybe over time the albinos would increase as a percentage of the population. But if the albino had no advantage over other people, and if the albino had 2 children or 10 children like everyone else, and lived 60 years like everyone else and died, then guess what? We wouldn't all become albino 10,000 years later. We'd still have awfully few albinos. They wouldn't increase as a proportion of the population. So each mutation has to have a significant advantage to survival or reproduction. Darwin himself said this, okay? Here's a quote direct from Darwin, word for word. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Dead, buried, 8 nails in the coffin, okay? Darwin's theory absolutely requires that every development from species to species, every development, every positive development must be explainable by incremental small steps, each of which can be explained essentially by a single mutation, and each of which improves the survivability of the individual or its reproduction. Okay, each step has to be advantageous. Wow, is that ever a problem? Is that ever a problem? Because just think of, for instance, think of the eye, okay? The eye, well, I'll go to another example, which is flight, birds. No, I started with the eye, so I'll continue with the eye. Any of these examples I'm giving could start an argument. My assertion is I would win the argument, but it would start an argument. They're invalid counter arguments, which I would have to get through one by one. The eye doesn't help the individual survive until they can see. Okay? If you had the eye with a retina but no iris, you're not going to out-survive your neighbors. If you had the iris but not the cornea, you wouldn't out-survive. If you had the iris and the cornea but not the optic nerve, you wouldn't survive. If you had the iris, the cornea, and the optic nerve, but not the hypothalamus or whatever part of the brain it is that interprets the image, you wouldn't out-survive, okay? You need a hell of a lot of interrelated systems to get an eye that helps anything survive, okay? So it is an example. The giraffe's neck is an example. For a giraffe to work, actually, we just think the neck got longer and longer and longer and longer and longer so the giraffe could eat the higher leaves when there weren't lower down leaves to eat. I suspect you could even find that argument somewhere in some stupid high school biology text. The truth is, the heart system of the giraffe, I don't know if they have two hearts. There's something incredibly novel and complex to the blood circulation system of a giraffe. Because basically, if you can get enough blood up to the head when it's on top of a 6-foot neck, then when it lowers its neck, it would brain hemorrhage. So there's a very sophisticated system for managing the differential blood pressure. There are all kinds of complicated interconnected systems that would have to be in the giraffe before any one of those would help it survive. As a matter of fact, on the contrary, it would die. If it got the long neck, but not that weird heart system, it would die the first time it lowered its head, okay? If it had the heart system without a long neck, its brain would probably explode in a hemorrhage. You know, everywhere you look in biology, in species, you see complicated interconnections. Now, one of those complicated interconnections, which is behind, which is Michael Behe's favored one. I'm running out off of sequence here a little bit, so let me pull up this slide, which is a very, actually, it's a very telling one, but it's a little bit nerdy, I suppose. No, I won't go out of sequence because I can't find it. So oh, here it is. Okay, I will go out of sequence. Okay, which is actually the blood clotting, because it turns out, and he goes into great depth in this in his book Darwin's Black Box. Darwin's Black Box, referring to the cell being the smallest part of life. We'll get into that later in the show if I get into it. I think I might get into the next show actually with the rate I'm going. Anyway, it's the system for blood clotting. Because stop to think about it. You have warm-blooded animals, right? A huge family of warm-blooded animals. They all need their blood to clot. In other words, you know what a hemophiliac is, right? You get a scratch and you bleed out, you die because your blood doesn't clot, okay? A warm-blooded animal is not going to live very long if their blood doesn't clot. But guess what? Once that clotting chemical reaction starts, it's a cascade, you know, because it's like, it has to clot, like if I cut my finger, you know, it clots on the surface, it clots, you know, maybe a 1/16 of an inch in or something. It has to clot a little bit in, so the blood doesn't just, you know, pour around it. But you know what? It has to stop clotting, because God forbid it should clot and clot up my arm and clot all the way through. Then I would just have, you know, jello for blood and I would die because my blood wouldn't flow. So you have to have the clotting begin fast. You have to have it stop at the right time. It has to be limited in how far it goes. And it has to reverse itself so that the blood flows again. There are a lot of chemical reactions involved. There are a lot of, I don't know the biology, enzymes produced, counter enzymes produced, all of these chemical reactions. And they all have to be there, or else any set of them without the others would just kill the animal by either bleeding out or all of his blood turning into cement, okay? That's one of his examples that he goes into of how you can't explain these complex systems by single individual mutations. So here's what he writes. The gradual accumulation of favorable mutations cannot explain the development of many vital biochemical mechanisms. An example is the mechanism for blood clotting. A large number of chemical reactions are involved in blood clotting, and here is the crucial point. If even one of these reactions does not occur, the blood will not clot. Therefore, the mechanism for blood clotting could not have evolved gradually through a series of mutations, with each mutation providing an additional survival advantage to the animal. Each such mutation would by itself be useless. Actually, worse than that. Each mutation by itself, I think, would tend to kill the animal. But anyway, all the mutations would have to be present to be of any use to the animal, because every one of the reactions involved in blood clotting must occur, or the blood will not clot. Now, I personally think he's being too modest, because I think that when you look at these mutations, you find that they always almost kill the animal if they don't go all through to the end, to the final point. Now, back to my high school biology class. I know I'm not going to get out of high school by the end of the show, so the next show will be a continuation of this show. Back to my high school biology class. Did any of you, I can't believe you guys have, I don't know what you call them, but little pictures of giraffes to put in the chat stream. I don't know how you do that. Did any of you have fruit flies in your high school biology class? Put in the chat if you studied fruit flies. Now, there are a couple of things about fruit flies I want to talk about. First of all, the where can I find it? I did not actually write it down. I can't believe it. Okay, fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster, if I remember correctly. They are Drosophila melanogaster. So right away you feel smart, right? Because you're not studying fruit flies, you're studying Drosophila melanogaster. So the chapter in your biology text about Drosophila melanogaster must be written by really smart people, because they know such long, complicated words. Okay, so I pulled this off the internet in the last couple of days from a science discovery site. So essentially it's a website that's basically like a science high school textbook. Fruit flies. I want to see if any of you, no, none of you talked to me about fruit flies in high school. Okay, so here's the story. Fruit flies are used for experiments in evolution, for proof of evolution, because they have very short life cycles. I think it's like 24 hours. You go from one adult fruit fly to its offspring being an adult fruit fly ready to reproduce in 24 hours. So you can get a lot of generations, right? You get 365 generations in a year. So you can observe a lot of mutations. You can do a lot of experiments, intentionally mutating them, like irradiating the eggs or something. You know, you can experiment a lot very quickly because they have such a short life cycle. So they're really popular. So there are an example. They prove evolution because of all of the mutations that have been observed in fruit flies. I'm not joking. You've got to see this. This is embarrassing. It should be embarrassing to the high school textbook. So, okay, so let me pull up the slide. Okay. Let me go to the slide. This is from the Exploratorium. You can look at the website. It's very scientific. It's like a science museum in San Francisco. The fruit flies in this exhibit, I'll show you the exhibit. The fruit flies in this exhibit show just a few of the mutations that occur in natural fruit fly populations. The genetic instructions to build a fruit fly or any other organism are imprinted in its DNA, a long thread-like molecule packaged in bundles called chromosomes. Okay, do you see how much smarter we are already than our local parish priest? We have DNA, we have chromosomes, and maybe we even have Drosophila melanogaster. Okay, mutations are neither good nor bad. Now this is really the money quote. So it's highlighted. Mutations are neither good nor bad. Some may be beneficial for an organism, others may be lethal. By creating new gene versions, mutations are a driving force for changes in evolution, sometimes leading to new species. Okay, watch closely, kids, okay? We have here proof that evolution works because we have observed mutations in fruit flies, and we know that some mutations are beneficial and some mutations are not beneficial, but the beneficial ones add up and they're a driving force for change in evolution, leading to new species. So we all know that now. It's been proven by these mutations in fruit flies. So let us look at those mutations. Now, you'll have to take my word for this or go to the exploratorium, but this is every single fruit fly mutation that they show. Okay? I'm not joking. I am showing every fruit fly mutation in their exhibit. Remember, some mutations are beneficial, some are not. These are every single mutation in their exhibit. Okay? Bear with me, guys. It's going to be worth it. At the top, I know you can't read this. I do this in part because this is where my notes come from. But if you're looking at a laptop, you'll be able to read it. Maybe. Normal fruit flies, that's the picture at the top. These are normal fruit flies or wild types. They are the kind that appear in nature. Notice the shape and length of their wings. Now compare them to the other fruit flies here. Notice the shape of their wings. They're actually capable of flying. Okay, that's what makes them special. The next one, short-winged flies. Can you see how short their wings are? Notice the shortened wings of these flies. Flies with vestigial wings cannot fly. They have a defect in their vestigial gene on the second chromosome. These flies have a recessive mutation. Blah, blah, blah. Got that, guys? They can't fly. This is a mutation. Instead of normal wings, they have little stubby wings and can't fly. Next mutation, curly-winged flies. Notice the curled wings of these flies. They have a defect in their curly gene on the second chromosome. Having curled wings is a dominant mutation, which means that only one copy of the gene has to be altered to produce the deficit, the defect. In fact, if both copies are mutated, the flies do not survive. Anyway, guess what? Curly-winged flies cannot fly either, okay? So here we have all of the mutations for altered wing structures, which go from a fruit fly, which is perfectly happy flying from your overripe banana to your overripe mango, laying eggs and reproducing, to fruit flies that can only fly in circles because one of their wings is stubby, to fruit flies that can't fly at all because both of their wings are stubby, to fruit flies that have curly wings and can't fly at all. Okay, so those are the altered wing structures. But those are not the only kind of mutations we observe, fortunately. We're waiting for those mutations that help the fruit fly out-reproduce its brethren, right? Or out-survive its brethren. Because remember, that's what's needed for evolution, stepwise mutations that improve survivability. So let's go on to the next set of mutations that the Exploratorium has been so kind in enlightening us to. Top, normal fruit flies. Next one down, yellow fruit flies. Notice that these flies are yellower than the normal ones. They have a defect in their yellow gene. Okay? Since the yellow gene is needed for producing the black pigment, yellow mutant flies cannot produce this pigment. Okay, so they're yellow. Okay, they can still fly, they can still reproduce. It's like redheads, right? Well, redhead isn't a mutation. Albinos, okay? You've got this mutation. They can't produce black pigment. They're yellow. Whoopee-doo. Next mutation, ebony flies. Notice that these flies have a dark, almost black body. They carry a deficit in their ebony gene in their third chromosome. Okay, so these are the mutations, guys, that are supposed to show evidence that mutations lead to positive developments in the species because the mutations are improvements. I'll get to the last set of mutations before I tell the joke. These are neutral mutations, by the way, the color ones. They're like redheads or albinos or something. The third set of mutations of these fruit flies. I'm sorry, this is hilarious. Remember, this is an exhibit to brainwash little kids into understanding that we know about mutations, we know about stepwise improvements, we know how evolution happens. So notice, I am not cherry picking these examples. These are the only examples in Exploratorium, okay? I'm not cherry picking. They're all either totally neutral, like skin color, or defects which keep them from working, like stubby wings or curly wings, or let's get to the final slide. Final slide, please. Strangely formed heads. Top and fruit fly. This is a normal fruit fly. Notice the antennas are sticking out in front of their eyes. You're okay? They got legs in the right place. They have eyes. They have eyes in the right place. They have antenna in the right place. Guess what, guys? They can fly. They can find the rotten banana, and they can reproduce. Everything you want to be a surviving, successful fruit fly in life. Then we have this mutation that shows how evolution works. Eyeless flies. Notice that these flies have no eyes. They have a defect in their eyes, absent gene, which normally instructs cells in the larvae to form an eye. Okay, so we have blind fruit flies. I don't think they'll do a very good job of surviving. They're certainly not going to survive better. I doubt that they'll survive at all. I don't know how dependent fruit flies are on their eyes, but I have a feeling that it's not an advantage to be blind if you're a fruit fly, okay? I don't think they have seeing eye dog fruit flies to show these fruit flies around. Next defect, leg-headed flies. Notice that these flies have abnormal leg-like antennas on their foreheads. They have a defect in their antennapedia gene, which normally instructs some body cells to become legs. In these flies, the antennapedia gene falsely instructs cells that would normally form antenna to become legs instead. So instead of having antenna, I know you can't see this slide, it's probably too small. They have two legs sticking out of their foreheads where the antenna should be. Again, not a big advantage to survival or reproduction as far as I can tell. Okay, so I am not joking, guys. These are all of the mutations on Explorepedia. They all show how a single-celled amoeba could have become, Albert Einstein, because these mutations provide such advantages. Okay, now here is my next point, which is actually the key point. Mutations are always either neutral or destructive, period. Mutations are neutral or destructive. They do not increase complexity. They never increase complexity. They may be slightly advantageous. For instance, there might be some reason that being a yellow fruit fly, or let's say a black fruit fly. Well, let's go back to the moths. Let's say that there weren't black moths around before the Industrial Revolution, that the first black moth actually was a mutation, just like that fruit fly mutation. And yes, that was a survival advantage, granted. So there you had an advantage from a random mutation. But that was not an increase in complexity. It was complexity neutral. It was simply a change in the coloring, like the yellow fruit fly or the black fruit fly. I have, and I should have brought it up for this show, and I'll bring it up for the next show if I can find it. I actually have this wonderful interview with one of the leading evolutionary biologists. He was a professor at Oxford at the time. Dawkins, is that his name? I think it was Richard Dawkins. And the interviewer says to him, they're arguing about evolution. The interviewer does not believe in evolution. And he says to Dawkins, how can you assert that, mutations, evolution comes about through mutations or whatever? I don't remember the first question. Dawkins says, tens of thousands of mutations have been observed experimentally. That's a true statement. Interviewer says, can you name one of those mutations that resulted in an increase in complexity? 60 seconds of silence in the interview. And then Dawkins changes the subject. Seriously, I have that interview on tape. I'm sorry I didn't get around to, finding it. Mutations by their nature are basically they're degradations in function. But those degradations in function can have advantage. For instance, if the moth is black, actually that was a degradation in function in a sense, because being speckled was an advantage because the trees were speckled. But it turned out the trees turned black, so it turned out to be a kind of a simplification in function that was a survival advantage. It's a reduction in complexity. what mutations are, again, I'll go back to my Jaguar, okay? I could take a sledgehammer to the engine of that Jaguar, and it will run differently. And it might still run. It might use more gas. It might only work in first gear. It might pour gas out. It might make horrible noise. It might still run. It might still work in that sense. But it isn't going to work better. I'm not going to get more horsepower out of it by taking a sledgehammer to it, okay? Random mutations are not going to increase complexity. They may be neutral, complexity neutral, let's say, or they may be 99.999% of the time, they're degradations in complexity. They're blind flies. They're flies that can't fly. They're flies with antenna where they're, legs where their antenna is supposed to be. They're not improvements, but that is where we've had this continual increase in complexity from a single-celled organism. Remember, we all started out as a single-celled organism. That was proven by Theobald. Okay? It all came from random mutations that increased complexity from a single cell to us. Not one has ever been observed. Okay? I'm sorry. Anyway, okay. So how much longer I can only go 10 minutes longer. I'm sorry. Excuse me for taking a drink. Nice coffee. Okay. So I only have time. I don't have time to get to that single-celled organism. Creation out of nothing. Oh, life out of non-life. I'll save life out of non-life for the next show. Oh, I'm exhausted. I'm just reading the Einstein was autistic. He was a late speaker. I'm not sure that it was autism in his case. Maybe you know more than I do. I do know that he didn't speak till he was 4. But I was a very late speaker too, so I always kind of took pride and decided that I was a late speaker for the same reason Einstein was a late speaker, which wasn't autism. But anyway, okay, back to the show. I was just trying to mentally decide where I'm going to end the show. So I'm going to end the show before I get to life from non-life, which is, by the way, the biggest elephant in the room that contradicts atheistic evolution. Okay. So where do I go here? Okay, so I'll go to birds. So okay, well, we know where this complexity. We've gotten through Darwinian evolution. We understand about stepwise changes. All of them have to be advantages and so forth. And of course, there's tons of proof. We know there's tons of proof. You can just look at any biology textbook and find tons of proof. So here is one of those typical tons of proof, because we all know, of course, that the dinosaurs became birds. Birds evolved from dinosaurs. You can find that in any high school textbook. And, we know it because we have artists who have drawn the progression. I know, again, it's going to be too small, but you see those dinosaurs running around, and they're running around on 2 legs, and they have arms, and then those arms get little, I don't know what they're, little flaps under the armpit. I don't know what they're for ventilating their body odor or something. They certainly can't fly with them. You have this dinosaur with his 2 square foot wing under its arm, but who knows what it's for, but it's feathers. And they get bigger and bigger and bigger until you have a dinosaur with, feathers all out to the end of its wings. So it's that important, of course, it can fly. Now, I'm sorry. I don't know how, again, they get the excuse for this, because birds are extremely sophisticated. They have to be very lightweight. They actually also have to be small, by the way, because of the square-cube relationship. They have hollow bones. Did you know that? They have hollow bones, so they're lighter weight. Their feathers have hollow cores, so they're lighter weight. They have to survive with very little liquid, because liquid is very heavy. Water is very heavy, so somehow they have a system that means they have to drink a lot less and have a lot less fluid flowing through them than mammals and so forth, even than reptiles. Okay, so just growing, underarm feathers isn't going to get you very far in becoming a bird. But we know that's how it happened. I'm, of course, Sark. we have these drawings of what the animals look like, and above we see the evolution of a wing. So we see how we just went from an arm to an arm with a couple of stray feathers to an arm with a little flap under the armpit of feathers to an arm that has, looks like those old drawings of Icarus flying with, gluing feathers to his arms, to finally a full-scale wing, and we have birds. None of this. I mean, in other words, this is all an artist's conception. They're able to draw this sequence. The sequence doesn't make sense, because having feathers, having feathers in your armpit isn't going to make you out-survive anybody else. It might help you, out-reproduce if you have less body odor, and so the females like you better. But it's not going to be enough of an advantage to take over the gene pool. I mean, it's just a farce. And you need so many systems, all of which work, before you're going to be able to fly. And until you're able to fly, those stubby wings don't do you any good at all. You probably trip more. It's probably harder to balance. Who knows? But remember, each step, each single mutation has to be an advantage. Now, I know there are little quibbles you can make. I don't want to go into all the side arguments because I'll never finish. But I'm prepared to go into all those side arguments. Those little quibbles do not work. Fundamentally, each mutation has to be an advantage. Each mutation has to be essentially a single sledgehammer blow to the engine, a single break in the DNA strand. Okay, there are fancy breaks where, a stretch of genes gets broken out of one strand and glued into another strand. So technically speaking, it doesn't have to be a single gene, but the principle still holds. Anyway, of course, evolution is completely dependent on this fairy tale, and they're dying to find missing links. I'm sure you've heard all that expression, the missing link. So thank God in 1998 or 1999, they found the missing link between dinosaurs and birds. So finally, the transition between dinosaurs and birds has been proven. So here, this is all from about 1998 to 2000. So this is an ancient history we're dealing with. Okay, this is a newspaper article on the discovery as it was written up in National Geographic. Is it a bird? Is it a dinosaur? No, it's a fake. It was a coup for the National Geographic, the first pictures of a creature whose existence would turn the theory of bird evolution on its head. Archaeoraptor first turned up in a fossil fair, embedded in the stone were the fossilized bones of an extraordinary prehistoric animal with the complex limbs of a prototype bird and the distinctive tail of an earthbound dinosaur, edged with the shadow of what seemed to be feathers. It looked like a dinosaur that could fly. After months of scrutiny involving x-rays and scans, the bird dinosaur was proclaimed a new species, Archaeoraptor leoingenesis, by none other than the prestigious National Geographic journal. The magazine heralded the find as a crucial missing link representing conclusive proof that birds were the last living descendants of the dinosaurs. Isn't it nice that we have conclusive proof of yet another claim of evolution now from no less than the National Geographic? Well, I'm running out of time, so I'll just race through here. Here we have a photograph of the fossil. I don't know how much you can tell. I can't tell much from this. It looks like a fossil. It looks like slightly birdish. You can, by the way, easily Google this stuff if you're interested. If you just Google Archaeoraptor, you'll find it. And here we have, we have a photograph. We know it must be true because we virtually have a photograph of the Archaeoraptor in flight. Okay, of course, these are artists. They can do anything. But, if you're a 12-year-old kid and you see this, it's very hard. This is why we're talking red pill, right? The whole show is about the red pill. Because, I'm sorry, this places an image in the imagination. You forget the details and you think that this is real because you've seen a picture of it. So there we have a picture of this bird, this flying dinosaur. And then finally, we have, because, you know, you need these nice, neat progressions. You also have, of course, I don't know if this is from National Geographic, but you see the orderly progression. This looked to me like a plane taking off the runway, right? What's this? It's a dinosaur that's running down the runway faster and faster, sprouting more and more feathers as it goes until it becomes this velociraptor. It takes off. Now look at that thing. You think that thing's going to be able to fly? It looks like the Grinch who stole Christmas. Sorry. This is ridiculous. This stuff is from textbooks. This is what our kids are being fed. This is what we're being fed. This is, you know, this is the blue pill, guys. So anyway, so that is it, I think, okay? And I'm gonna have to draw this to a close here. Phew, let me take a deep breath. And yeah, I'm gonna have to draw this to a close. I'm looking at what's ahead of me, but I'll open up the whole can of worms of life from non-life. And maybe I shouldn't open that. I never want to stop. You've noticed that. I love doing these shows, but since I have probably can do it as soon as Friday, because it looks like what I had prepared for this show will be enough for the next show. And so, oh, I know what I want to close with. I want to close with two things. Okay. First of all, remember the theme of this show, guys, okay? This is, what was the guy's name? I keep forgetting. Morpheus or something? Morpheus. You know, red pill or blue pill, okay? Red pill. And everything that the New York Times says and the National Geographic says and the History Channel says is the blue pill. It's the blue pill. And the advantage of taking the red pill is an eternity of bliss in heaven. Really, that's the advantage of taking the red pill. And also, by the way, being in a good humor on Earth, because remember Edith Stein? I'll link this to the last show. Where can I find the Edith Stein quote? Edith Stein, worst death you can imagine. Here's her quote. Whatever did not fit in with my plan did lie within the plan of God. I have an ever deeper and firmer belief that nothing is merely an accident when seen in the light of God, that my whole life down to the smallest detail has been marked out for me in the plan of divine providence. That's true of us, okay? Really, it pays to take the red pill. Life becomes, there's never any reason to be anxious about anything. We know what awaits us after we die, and we know how to make the most out of our eternity while here on Earth. We know how to cash in every minute of life on Earth for at least a Bentley, never mind a Jaguar, at least a Bentley in heaven, right? I mean, a garage full of Bentleys and Ferraris and whatever we want in heaven. You know, maybe by a lowly Ave Maria, maybe by sharing our faith with somebody. But really, we can build up a huge bank account that we will benefit from for all eternity, every hour of our life on Earth. But we have to take the red pill, right? We have to believe this is all true. We have to act like it's all true. I'm not sure we have to believe it's all true. We have to act like it's all true. And the belief will come too, because believe me, it's just a blue pill. It's just garbage. I mean, it's just totally unbelievable. So I will finish, as I said, I will actually finish. Eventually I have to finish with G.K. Chesterton. I'm going to go back to G.K. Chesterton's quote. First, I will go back to the quote about miracles. The believers in miracles, including, by the way, the fact that we were created by God, but the believers in miracles accept them, rightly or wrongly. Well, that's actually, this doesn't apply. I take that back. So this talks about like the other miracles, like the miracle of Lourdes and stuff. The believers in miracles, rightly or wrongly, believe in them because they have evidence for them. The disbelievers in miracles deny them, rightly or wrongly, because they have a doctrine against them. So that quote I gave before, I'm not sure it's the best quote for today's show. I apologize. Now, a better quote, also from Chesterton. It's a continuation of last quote. If it comes to human testimony, there is a choking cataract of human testimony in favor of the supernatural. If you reject it, you can only mean one of two things. You either deny that the testimony of ordinary people is to be believed, in other words, all of the saints, all of the people who have experienced miracles and so forth, or you affirm the main principle of materialism, the abstract impossibility of a miracle. I mentioned that in the beginning of the show. You have a perfect right to do so, but in that case, you are the dogmatist. It is we Christians who accept all actual evidence. It is you rationalists who refuse actual evidence, being constrained to do so by your creed. And I will go further, because that doesn't reflect the show either. The basic thrust of the show was you're not only rejecting the actual evidence, you are making up evidence left and right, and you are making up evidence that doesn't even make sense. You don't even have an explanation for how those little stubby feathers, propagated throughout the dinosaur population, generation after generation after generation, after having been a single mutation in one individual, until you got one that could fly. I mean, it is the worst fiction imaginable that's being passed off as science, okay? That's it. I guess that's it. I guess I have to stop. I always have to stop sometimes, so I guess I'll stop now. Thank you very much for watching. I want to close with a glory be, because you know why I really want to do this series? Is God is being deprived of so much glory. He gives us so much. Just stop. One little noodle of a thought. Okay. He gave us the world. Every blade of grass, every sunset, every cloud in the sky, every cup of coffee, every pet dog, every beautiful woman, every cold that we get over, life is permeated with this unbroken gift from God, including all of the beauty in it and our own lives. But that wasn't enough for God, because we had original sin. So on top of all of the glory we owe to God because of creation, including, by the way, the creation of the laws of physics and the universe, and as well as life, that wasn't enough for him because we were in a state of original sin. So we don't only owe him all of that world of glory for creation, but we owe him a whole nother world of glory for our redemption. Because on top of creating all of that and creating us, he accepted the incarnation, suffering, and death on the cross for our redemption. So that's an equally large universe of glory that we owe God as Christians. Okay, the first universe of glory, all mankind should know enough to owe God, because it's got to do with creation. The second universe of glory that we owe God, we have to be Christian to understand, because it has to do with what he did for our salvation and what he did for our redemption. But there are these two universes of glory to God that he is being deprived of because of the blue pill. Okay, so that's why I'm doing this series. So let me close the show with a glory be for all of what we owe God glory and praise for our creation, for the creation of all of contingent existence, for the creation of the entire universe, for the creation of life, for the creation of all the beauty, and for the creation for our own lives and all of our own divine providence in our own lives. And on top of that, our redemption and Jesus' sacrifice. So if you would join me, glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Happy St. John the Baptist feast day, and see you again in a few days. Bye for now.